Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, I would like to begin my reply with some main points that I see here from this debate. Right? The first that they bring is about the financial crisis, right, and the status quo, the current moment. And they say that eventually becomes first step, it will solve that problem. I think that's analysis. There is lack of analysis. That how the state is really going to solve the deepest problem in European country right now, right? And also, we also provide, our side provide regulatory system that would eventually be established, right, in January 2013. And they claim that they already said that in model, which I didn't hear, right? We are the one who said that, and it's come very late from them. Right? And also there is no details and analysis on global crisis, right? They are stating that European Union is the problem, is the main, is the creation of the problem in Greece in all that. But we are facing global crisis, right? As my last speaker said, overall in general on this world, right? And my second point here is about the sovereignty. They all totally ignore the sovereignty of the country in EU, right? They say that okay, there's cultural difference, and okay, there will be in each country they still remain the cultural difference. But when it comes to first state, right, there will be federal state or the central law, right? That would create a bad effect, a bad feeling for some minority. It is possible to have a bad feeling in some minority in each country, right? Because we say that in EU, countries are very cultural diverse, right? And my third point is about big countries still influence in status quo, and I say that when it comes to superstate, Germany, France, Italy will still have an influence on the superstate federal law anyway, right? So and then it didn't solve any problem. So, and in the fourth main point is about they say that they are going to cooperate together very well. The problem will be solved very easily, and the difference between US and Euro is not that different. It is totally invalid because in EU, the geographically, cultural, and all that is really different, right? But in US, the cultural and economically different is not that it's not that large, right? Even the language, right? In EU there are so many language and cultural difference, but in US they are quite similar, although minor differences in that. That's why we are saying that you cannot compare EU to US, right? And my last reply comparing is about they forget the system that were implemented in EU, each country, right? Like we said, retirement rate, right? Tax rate. How would that going to affect the overall EU country, right? How would that make people feel bad when the higher tax was implemented on them when it comes to first state, right? How would they feel bad when richer country has to be taxed even more in order to save Greece, right? And how would that make people in general, right, feel about that? And also the Middle East country falling, that's the last point I think is really clear, right? That European countries are already democratic, and there are already many democratic countries in the world, and still Middle East, such as Syria, is still having a problem. But why Egypt is not having a problem? So it means that the example from EU being democratic by superstate is totally invalid. That's why I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Throughout this whole debate, the opposition has failed in two things. They were very good in accepting the problem and acknowledging its existence and how it happened. Actually, they were glad to appreciate that it happened because of lack of regulation. But then they said, we're just going to use the current mechanism. That means the current mechanism doesn't have that regulation because they consider there is a lack of regulation. So it's not very clear how they're going to solve this problem. But then again, they start forming these strawman burdens and these strawman harms at the end of the debate, which we'll address. But let me first also address this contradiction that I found in the Muic speech, right? Because he tells us, you know, right now these countries can veto certain decisions, right? But then it says we want to avoid these countries from imposing their wills on their nations. By having that ability to veto these certain agreements or these certain policies, that is an act of imposing their wills on these countries. Something which we said we're going to, this is one of the three parts of our model. We said there will be laws of national vetoes, no country will have that right. We also mentioned that there will be Europe-wide elections, so you still have democracy. I don't get what the whole point about democracy was. And then third of all, we talked about the responsibilities, like economic policy, federal policy, foreign policy, and dealing with domestic issues. And they tell us, you're going to be losing sovereignty. We don't think that is the case. We said, yes, it's not an absolute. These countries will have to concede some of their sovereignty, but for the greater goal. And we said they'll still have a hold on certain sensitive issues, such as culture, such as education policies, such as law and order and taxation, local taxation systems. That is why we mentioned there's the federal, there's the state, and there's the local. These three levels of government ensure that people in those countries or those states in the European superstate will still get the representation that they deserve via elections as well, right? And then they tell us, oh, there's a high risk of global crisis, a new point coming from. But we say that, okay, the current risk, we accept that is a risk, right? But the current risk is the most pressing one, and it's happening right now. And it's the national debt crisis of like countries such as the PIGS countries, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, Spain, right? So you still have a contingent effect even right now. I mean, that can still spread as well. You don't necessarily have to have a federal state for you to have a global financial crisis. It can still happen in any case. But we still say on the second level that, we say regulation is a welcome mechanism, something that is exclusive on our side, right? Regulation that is agreed on by all countries, by all nations, but one that is lacking in the EU right now. So the US global financial crisis was not because of federalization, but perhaps because of overlooking regulation issues, something which we can learn from, right? It's not like the ultimate harm to say, oh, but there's the high risk of a global financial crisis, therefore definitely the EU should not become a European superstate. That is just ridiculous, right? And then they talk to us about the willingness of states, which we addressed because we told them that people are already helping out Greece, but it is only reactionary. But now we want these countries to take active steps, like to go into parliament, to debate these issues beforehand, to know what regulations they're going to be accountable for, right? So we're going to move away from that rhetoric and unite under a common barrel, right? So the 3 points that we brought you were economic governance, something that is needed. We told you about internal affairs, dealing with issues of immigration, dealing with issues of discrimination, something that they never really addressed. They told us it's a problem, but then they didn't tell us how they're going to solve it, right? And we also told you how we are better able to deal with international relations. We're not saying European countries are not democratic, but we're saying they have different stances when it comes to aiding countries such as Syria. But once you have that goal of protecting the Union or protecting the image of the EU as a superstate, then it's easier for them to reach a consensus on the action that they will take on issues regarding Syria and other nations that are undemocratic or struggling with democracy issues. So all these questions about tax and everything, we told you these countries still have that autonomy. The federal state forms that blanket tax at the highest level. You still have multiple levels to deal with that. There's still a check and balance, right? You still have people voting in elections, right? It still happens. All these things are accounted for. But now you have that regulation, you have that political union, you have that joint political interest and common goal, which will push the EU forward. We're very proud to propose.